Welcome back, YouTube, to Icy Chap's Edge. I'm Icy Chap, here with another knife review, this time looking at the Knives of Alaska Bush Camp. Now, Knives of Alaska is not one of the better known manufacturers. They are not as well known as, say, Kershaw or Benchmade or Cold Steel, but they do make an amazing product. They are made in the United States, and they do tend to be a little bit pricier, but you do get what you pay for. They specialize in knives for the outdoorsman, hunting, fishing. They make ulus, some old school Canadian designs. But of all their knives, I find the Bush Camp is really the most universal. Let's start with the blade design. I love the blade design. It's a bowie style blade with a modified drop point. It's got a nice flat edge for the first half and good sweep to the latter half. And I like that for two reasons. One, for most bushcraft tasks, I really want to be using the edge very close to the handle. And what I'm really talking about is choking up and using the knife for notching or cutting into wood. And it's going to allow me to whittle, it's going to allow me to notch and make this knife very useful for bushcraft. As far as other slicing tasks, I've got a nice sweep to the latter half of the blade. And because of that nice choil and indent on the back of the blade, I can really choke up, and I've got excellent control on both the tip and the latter half of the edge. So, a very nimble design as well. You'll notice that the blade is not a full flat grind. And that, unfortunately, to me is a hit against the knife. The reason I still went with this, I bought the knife knowing it was not a flat grind, is because it's D2 steel. And I figured I wanted to have a little bit more steel behind that edge. You'll notice that the knife is not very thick, so it's fairly light in hand, but the fact that it was not a full flat grind told me that it was going to be a little bit more robust. Let me tell you, that did not prevent this knife from taking a razor sharp edge. Now, having that bevel close to the center of the knife makes the knife similar to a scandi grind, but unfortunately it's not a scandi grind, which I think would be better for this knife. It does have a relief bevel right before that edge, and I actually think that's a mistake. I think this knife would be even sharper and more useful if that was a full scandi grind, and I may have a professional do it. I won't do it myself. But as far as generally useful blade design, I don't think you can get much better than this. It is a 6-inch blade, which makes the knife long enough for pretty much any camp task you have, but still small enough, light enough, and nimble enough for all your small bushcraft tasks. So really an excellent blade design. Let's look at the handle. I chose Suregrip. Knives of Alaska does use Stag, and it's a little bit more expensive, but I wanted the Suregrip for a couple reasons. Number one, impervious to the elements. It's basically a type of rubberized plastic. Very, very robust and durable material. Number two, it's very deeply checkered, and you've got the finger grooves. That gives me great purchase and great control in all kinds of weather. Number three, it offers me a little bit of protection, not only if the knife is cold in cold weather, but also if I choose to baton on the back of the blade. Which brings me to the blade steel. I actually have used this knife to baton and chop with. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Icy Chap, that's D2 steel. You don't want to be chopping with that thing, you're going to chip that edge. Well, I was pleasantly surprised, and I was willing to risk it, and I was rewarded with the experience with this knife, so that I can now tell you, you can use this knife as an all-around survival blade too. This knife chopped into some relatively thin logs, but nevertheless it did chop, and I did use it to baton through two relatively thin logs as well. And I half expected that edge to either chip or at least roll, and I gotta tell you, it suffered absolutely no damage whatsoever. Even the finish suffered almost no wear. There's just a tiny bit of wear around the bevel, but it's almost invisible, and the edge only took about 8 to 10 passes on the fine stone on a Spyderco sharp maker to basically bring it back to shaving sharp. So unbelievable job with the heat treatment. And I can say confidently that this is hands down the best D2 blade I have ever used. So like I said, it's a little bit pricier, but you do get what you pay for. So we've got an excellent blade design. I would like to see a slightly different grind on it, but the overall design is very universal, and I really favor that bowie shape. You've got a great control because of the indent and the finger choil. I would like to see some jimping back there, but if I do get this blade reground to a scandi grind, I'll probably get the knife grinder to add a little bit of jimping back there. I really like the handle design and material, so high marks for the knife. And of course that blade steel is just amazing. So very high marks. Unfortunately, the knife loses marks for the sheath. Now, Knives of Alaska went with a very well-made, very handsome leather sheath. It's a nice dark polish on it, nice dark stain to it. Very high quality stitching, high quality leather. The craftsmanship is very high. Unfortunately though, you've got only one option for attachment, and that's a belt loop. And because it's leather, it's going to absorb moisture. And we've got a very sharp D2 blade. Well, if we store this knife or carry it for extended periods of time in this sheath, it's not going to be sharp for very long. The moisture content of the sheath and the moisture that it's going to absorb from the atmosphere might become transferred to the blade and will likely dull that edge. Now, for shorter excursions, I think you can carry this knife in the sheath. It does have fairly decent retention with the strap because of the finger grooves, and it is pretty handsome, and it might be fun to carry this knife on your belt if you go hunting, fishing, or even just into the woods. But I do have to give it a hit because the sheath is leather and because it's so limited in its carry options. So overall, the knife still gets very high marks. I give it an 8 out of 10. I was extremely impressed with the robustness of this D2 steel. And whatever Knives of Alaska did with their heat treatment, like I said before, they got it right. So go out and get one if you're willing to afford that price. I know it's a little bit expensive for most users, but you will get what you pay for. And Knives of Alaska makes an amazing product. So again, 8 out of 10 for the Bush Camp. That's my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave comments, subscribe, and have a good one.